the opening of the Banking Committee, so we will do that. Good morning. Welcome to today's Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies Subcommittee hearing to review the activities and fiscal year 2023 funding request of the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. We will recognize members in order of appearance, and there will be 5 minutes for questions. Our witness today is Ambassador Katherine Tai, the United States Trade Representative. Welcome, Ambassador Tai. We're glad you're here, and it's nice to see you again. As this committee knows, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative is responsible for developing and coordinating U.S. international trade, commodity, and direct investment policy, and overseeing negotiations with other countries. As the U.S. Trade Representative, Ambassador Tai is the administration's principal trade advisor, negotiator, and spokesperson on U.S. trade policy. In order for USTR to succeed, this subcommittee must ensure it has sufficient resources to carry out its important mission. To that end, the fiscal year 2022 omnibus spending bill included $71 million for the Office of the United States Trade Representative. For fiscal year 2023, the administration requests $76.54 million for USTR. So we look forward to hearing how you plan to use that money and what your priorities are, Ambassador. While we consider these priorities, it's important to also consider the most pressing trade issues confronting our country. One of those issues is Russia. Following Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, the United States led a broad coalition of allies to swiftly punish Putin and his cronies with crippling sanctions. During today's hearing, I'd be interested in learning more about your efforts to counter Russia's aggression, especially in light of the recently signed law revoking Russia's permanent normal trade relations status. Another issue is our trade relationship with China. As you know, China has failed to fulfill obligations outlined in the Phase 1 agreement, particularly its purchase commitments under that deal. China also serially violates human rights and workers' rights despite its assertions to the contrary. I'm interested to hear about the administration's efforts to ensure China lives up to its end of the deal and your view of the future of the U.S.-China trade relationship. I'd also like to learn more about how the administration's recent launch of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity fits into that relationship. Another related issue is the tariffs imposed on goods from China under Section 301 of the Trade Act. In fiscal year 2022 omnibus spending bill passed in March, Congress directed USTR to establish and administer an exclusion process for these tariffs. Now, I can speak to many New Hampshire businesses that can't source goods from outside of China who are understandably seeking some real relief from tariffs. We look forward to hearing how USTR is working to comply with this congressional directive. And I just want to close by commending you on your achievements in your first year as U.S. Trade Representative. Through your work, the United States ended a decades-long civil aircraft trade dispute, resulting in lifted tariffs on billions of dollars worth of U.S. exports, ranging from products like cheese to distilled spirits. We also reached deals with the United Kingdom, the European Union, and Japan to remove existing tariffs on steel and aluminum. And moreover, under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, USTR has employed the Rapid Response Mechanism to defend workers' rights. I think that's proved that when done right, trade agreements can really foster positive movement on labor and environmental rights rather than negative ones. Ambassador Tai, we have a lot to discuss. I thank you for appearing before us today. And with that, our ranking member is just right on cue for his remarks. But while he's getting ready, let me just say I have a statement that I will submit for the record that includes some additional comments that I left out. So I will do that without objection. And if the ranking member is ready, I will call on him.
Chairman Shaheen, thank you very much. And please know that my tardiness was not related to the moment in which you concluded your opening remarks.
That's okay, I gave you. I told everybody that where you were, so they knew you weren't just playing hooky.
Thank you very much. Thanks for covering for me. I appreciate you convening this hearing, and I appreciate you honoring my request that we have a hearing focused on trade and have the trade ambassador before us. And so thank you very much. And Ambassador Tai, welcome. I appreciate you coming to testify before our subcommittee. At last year's hearing, I stated that you were stepping into your role at USTR at a time in which trade policy and trade enforcement has arguably never been more important. I believe that statement is even more true today. You can consider record high inflation impacting Americans at the pump, the grocery store, and the pharmacy, supply chain disruptions that continue to ripple through the economy, and China's continued effort to steal American intellectual property and in all ways be our adversary. Ambassador, due to inflation the American people are struggling to meet, you have a critical role in helping lead us out of this economic environment and helping Americans get back on their feet. I'm very interested in the enforcement of USMCA and the Phase 1 China trade deal, as both have significant impacts on my home state of Kansas. Kansans benefit from exporting goods and services in a fair trade environment. Given that Mexico, China, and Canada are consistently the top markets for Kansas exports, we must ensure that these trading partners live up to their commitments in USMCA and in the Phase 1 agreement. I'm eager to receive an update from you about the current compliance with these agreements and I support efforts to crack down on unfair trade practices. I also want to further understand how you are managing a full slate of Section 301 investigations. Congress has directed USTR to, quote, immediately establish and administer an exclusion process for U.S. businesses. And the inaction of the administration is putting extra burdens on American businesses and upon the workers. I look forward to hearing from you how USTR plans to execute an exclusion process and how you are reviewing expired exclusions to make certain that businesses have the opportunity to petition their government for relief. As we consider USTR's funding needs for fiscal 2023, I'm looking forward to learning more about President Biden's trade strategy and priorities, and also better understanding what level of resources USTR requires to perform these growing responsibilities. I believe the administration's policies have been unclear thus far, and I hope today that you will provide some clarity on trade strategies you are pursuing to benefit Kansas and all the people of America. Finally, I'm concerned about this administration's failure to pursue and secure new trade agreements. Other countries are securing market-opening trade agreements, and our absence from large bilateral, multilateral trade agreements is putting the U.S. at a disadvantage. This includes seeing little or no progress on an agreement with the United Kingdom and continued unwillingness to join an agreement with our Indo-Pacific partners, such as the Comprehensive and Progressive Trade-Pacific Partnership. My view is we can't afford to remain on the sidelines as other countries enhance their market access and set rules that may disadvantage U.S. companies and our workers. Ambassador, thank you. Again, I recognize the challenging circumstances you find yourself in, and I look forward to hearing your testimony today and hope that we can work productively together to promote fair trade, global trade policies that benefit America, its economy, our workers, and our families. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Ambassador Tai, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Chair Shaheen and Ranking Member Moran. It is an honor to be here with you and the members of the subcommittee today. Thank you for inviting me to discuss President Biden's fiscal year 23 budget request for the Office of the United States Trade Representative. Today, I'd like to highlight our progress in implementing a worker-centered trade policy that increases American competitiveness abroad, advances the rights of workers, and establishes the United States as a leader in shaping a more resilient form of globalization. Before I begin, I want to be clear that Congress is our constitutional partner on trade, and close collaboration is critical to developing successful American trade policy. The President's budget request for fiscal year 2023 provides $76.54 million for USTR. This includes $61.54 million available directly to USTR and $15 million allocated through the Trade Enforcement Trust Fund. This request will help the agency enforce our existing trade agreements, strengthen ties with allies, and advance a trade agenda that supports the middle class, improves labor and environmental standards, and creates an inclusive prosperity. Enforcement is a critical component of our administration's trade agenda. Manufacturers, farmers, and ranchers do not always get the full benefits of our trade agreements. Workers and communities suffer due to unfairly traded imports. This creates a trust gap with the public, which is why enforcement is needed as part of our worker-centered trade policy. For example, using the rapid response mechanism in the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, we asked the government of Mexico to review whether workers at 4 facilities in Mexico were denied the rights of free association and collective bargaining. Thanks to the operation of this mechanism, workers at the General Motors facility in Silao, Mexico, voted for a new union that negotiated a better contract, which will provide higher wages, and that is good for American workers. Our enforcement efforts also helped protect the environment. We initiated consultations with Mexico to prevent illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. We also reached an agreement with Vietnam to keep illegally harvested or traded timber out of the global supply chain. Finally, we are pressing Canada to fulfill its commitment to U.S. dairy farmers and producers, and recently initiated a second set of dispute settlement consultations over Canada's tariff rate quota restrictions. Canada's actions continue to prevent U.S. dairy producers from receiving the benefits promised in the USMCA. We will not give up until our farmers see those promises delivered. The next major component of our trade agenda is the realignment of the U.S.-China trade relationship. Since last year, we have pressed the PRC to live up to its commitments under the Phase 1 agreement. Several rounds of difficult discussions made clear the limits of the PRC's interest in delivering on those obligations. And that is why it is time for us to turn the page on the old playbook. The PRC's non-market industrial policies unfairly target U.S. workers, businesses, and key sectors. We have to use all available tools and develop new tools to defend our economic interests and values. President Biden recognizes that market economies must act in concert to confront policies that are fundamentally at odds with the modern trading system. And that is why we have also brought a renewed focus to engagement with our partners and allies, who also are negatively impacted by the PRC's unfair trade and economic practices. Beyond this cooperation, we are also deepening our engagement with key trading partners through new and existing bilateral and multilateral agreements and arrangements. Last month, I joined President Biden to launch the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. We are developing high-standard commitments for the digital economy, labor, environment, agriculture, and trade facilitation that promotes resilience and facilitates sustainable economic growth for our workers and for our planet. We also announced the S Taiwan Initiative on 21st Century Trade in June. Under the auspices of the American Institute in Taiwan and the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office, we are developing concrete ways to strengthen this bilateral trade and investment relationship. And beyond the Indo-Pacific region, we have stepped up our trade engagement in many other areas, most recently at the World Trade Organization. During the WTO's 12th Ministerial Conference last week, the United States helped produce breakthroughs on key issues, including a multilateral agreement to prohibit subsidies for those engaged in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, an extension of a moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions, a modification of intellectual property protections for COVID vaccines for the COVID pandemic, and a ministerial declaration on food insecurity and a commitment to examine how we can together facilitate safe agricultural trade to feed a growing global population. We are also building on our bilateral engagement with our transatlantic partners. Last year, we reached an understanding in the Boeing-Airbus dispute and adopted a framework to resolve the Section 232 steel and aluminum trade disputes that removed or avoided more than $20 billion in tariffs, all without surrendering our principles and our interests. Lowering those tensions helped us begin negotiations on a global arrangement with the European Union. This will be the world's first sectoral arrangement on steel and aluminum trade to tackle emissions and non-market excess capacity. We also regained access to the EU market for American shellfish for the first time in a decade and recently concluded the second ministerial meeting of the US-EU Trade and Technology Council. Our work to use trade as a collective policy tool to raise standards in the world economy extends to our efforts directed at eliminating the use of forced labor in global supply chains. On June 21st, which is yesterday, the Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force launched its enforcement strategy of the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act to prohibit the importation of goods produced entirely or partially in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region of the PRC or produced by certain entities. As you can see, we have an ambitious and important agenda. I look forward to working with this subcommittee to enact our fiscal year 2023 budget request so that USTR can fulfill this agenda on behalf of the American people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Tai. I would like to begin with the 301 tariffs and the exclusion process. I was pleased to have the chance to talk with you a little bit about this on the phone this week. And I think this hearing gives us an opportunity to explore what USTR is thinking with respect to the exclusion process and how this process is going to move forward. So I want to, as I referenced in my opening statement, the 2022 Omnibus Appropriations Bill included a directive for USTR to, and I'm quoting here, immediately establish and administer an exclusion process for U.S. businesses seeking relief from Section 301 tariffs that are active as of the date of enactment of this act, end quote. So more than 3 months have passed, and it's not clear what process has been established. And again, as we discussed, this is a process that's essential for many of our New Hampshire businesses. I'm sure everybody on this subcommittee has examples in their own states of how businesses are affected. So can you update us on how USTR is planning to comply with this congressional directive?
Thank you for that question, Senator Shaheen. I appreciate the attention that you and the subcommittee have paid to the tariff exclusion process, and I know the particular leadership that this subcommittee has played in the history of the tariff exclusion process. The purpose of the Section 301 investigation and associated tariff action is to address China's unfair trade practices. The existing tariffs are there to address China's IP rights abuses and also forced tech transfer practices. At the same time, we are committed to ensuring that the 301 tariffs support the Biden-Harris administration's deliberative long-term vision for realigning the U.S.-China trade relationship with our priorities. So let me just say this. I think that you and in general our members of Congress have been extremely articulate and effective in advocating for your constituents in terms of, as Senator Moran mentioned, very challenging economic circumstances that we have all found ourselves in over these past several years. What I would like to let you know is that at my office, USTR, we are taking into consideration in the design of the tariff exclusion processes that we have implemented and the ones that we are looking to implement in the future, all of the feedback that we have gained from Congress and our stakeholders, including the results of a GAO report addressing the past administration of the 301 exclusion process. So what I would like to convey to you is that we in the Biden administration are moving forward with respect to the entire China trade relationship, including the tariffs and the requests for an exclusion process with a deliberativeness to ensure that any exclusion processes that we implement and have implemented are fair, transparent, administrable, and give our stakeholders the opportunity to make their case for relief at a very challenging time in our economy and the world economy.
Well, thank you. I appreciate there are a lot of considerations when it comes to tariffs, particularly when we're looking at the actions of China. But you called what Congress is asking a request. It's not a request, Ambassador Tai. It's a directive. And I wonder if you will commit to us in the subcommittee that you're going to comply with this directive and give us some sort of a time frame on when you expect that to happen.
Well, Senator Shaheen, on this one, I think I would direct you to the President's comments over the weekend that with respect to China tariffs and next steps on actions that they are pending with him right now.
So are you suggesting that the subcommittee needs to refer this issue to the president and ask him when USTR is planning to comply?
I think what I'm saying to you, Chair Shaheen, is that these issues are under consideration for decision as we speak right now.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Senator Shaheen, thank you for your highlighting the directive nature of what Congress has told the USTR ambassador to do. And while it may take a short amount of time in order to accomplish that, we've seen no evidence that the requirement, the directive, is being followed. Ambassador, the pinch of input costs is soaring and very damaging to American agriculture producers. The invasion of Ukraine has only heightened the demand for food production, but tariffs on fertilizer represent an opportunity for you to relieve some of the pressure on the agriculture community. There are many of these duties are put in place by the Department of Commerce, but USTR can and should play a role, one, certainly in expanding markets, but what can you do? I'm talking about phosphates from Morocco. This administration placed countervailing duties on fertilizer ingredients coming from Trinidad and Tobago. What can you do to help lower the cost of imported fertilizer components?
Ranking Member Moran, I know how important agricultural production is to the U.S. economy, but also how important our agricultural production is to the world economy and to food security, frankly. And I'm also keenly aware of the exacerbations on global trade and supply that Russia's decision to invade Ukraine has inflicted on all of us. With respect to fertilizer trade and supply and what USTR can do about it, let me say this. I consider Secretary Vilsack, our Agriculture Secretary, to be one of my most important partners in the administration and, frankly, one of my closest friends personally. We have been working together very closely on food security issues writ large, but also specifically on the fertilizer pinch that we are all in. We have been working closely with USDA, both between myself and the Secretary and also our teams, to encourage feedback from a variety of our stakeholders on USDA's American-made fertilizer initiative that provides a $250 million grant for domestic production of fertilizer. USTR is also working with the interagency to encourage multilateral development banks, the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the International Fund for Agricultural Development to finance projects to expand fertilizer production, as well as increase the efficient use of fertilizer and precision agriculture, both areas where American farmers are, frankly, at the leading and cutting edge of practice in the world. And we will continue to work internally within the administration and with our allies and partners to find additional ways to mitigate the global fertilizer shortage and prevent similar shocks in the future. The additional thought that I would offer you in your description of the pinch that we are in is, and I think that this is an issue that presents itself across the board in many different areas, and I'll be glad to highlight them, is one of the biggest challenges that we have right now is how to responsibly and effectively react to, respond to the current economic challenges and shocks that we have, but with an eye to ensuring that we are building towards a future system that is more resilient, that does not throw us back into the crisis that we're encountering today.
Ambassador, I know Secretary Vilsack well myself, and I have encouraged him to be a voice for agriculture producers throughout this administration. So I appreciate that you're consulting and working with him, and he's working with you. But your answer, it seemed to me, was a list of things that we are attempting to do, but did not include anything on that list about actually eliminating the tariffs or the countervailing duties that have been imposed on the phosphates and other fertilizer components that come into the United States.
If I may respond to that specifically, the anti-dumping countervailing duty programs are run out of Commerce, and your specific question is, what can we do at USTR, and that was the filter through which I was responding.
And so is the answer that you have nothing to do with eliminating those countervailing tariffs and duties at the Department of Commerce?
They're not my programs, but I am happy with Secretary Vilsack to have those conversations with the Commerce Secretary.
Please do. I've had those conversations with the Secretary myself. Madam Chairman, I don't think I have time for another question.
Thank you. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Shaheen, Ranking Member Moran. Great to be with you again, Catherine. U.S. Trade Representative Tai, appreciate your time before our subcommittee and look forward to working with the chair to pursue our directives to the administration and our prerogatives. I'm grateful for the work that you're doing and your accomplishments. I'm particularly encouraged to hear the progress on IUU fishing, your openness to working together on promoting Delaware's chicken exports, our favorite protein, which for those who have other proteins they really care about, but happy to go to bat with anyone about why chicken is the low-fat, high-protein, high-cost, low environmental impact protein that the world needs today.
No commercials here. Come on.
Reputation for bipartisanship. You're exceeding your capabilities here.
Thank you for what I think was a marathon WTO ministerial in Geneva and for your work there. And, you know, frankly, I have just two quick questions, but I'd love to hear what you see as the path forward in our trade relations with China and in trying to make the WTO relevant and effective in some way. China, my understanding, has agreed to exclude itself from the TRIPS waiver for COVID vaccines. Is that an enforceable commitment in any way?
We see it as a legally binding commitment that they have made at the WTO, yes.
And I'd be interested in what you see as the path forward for plurilateral and bilateral negotiations. I have a bill with Senator Portman, the Trading System Preservation Act, which would authorize the president to negotiate sector-specific agreements with like-minded partners within the WTO system, an area that I think may be fruitful for work. And we're introducing today the Special Relationship Act, Senator Portman and I, that would authorize a bilateral FTA negotiation with the UK. I understand that market access isn't on the table on the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, but I'm encouraged that the IPF has been launched. Should we be negotiating to open foreign markets to U.S. producers? And what are your priorities for these negotiations?
Senator Coons, that was a number of issues, and I'm
going
to work backwards because your last question is one that's freshest in my mind. On the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, it is true that market access is not on the table in these negotiations. What I'd like to say on that is when we talk about market access in trade terms and trade terminology, we are talking specifically about tariff liberalization, and that is what is not on the table. Nevertheless, in our trade agreements, in our trade arrangements, and everything that we do in trade, it is about markets, and it is about how we work together. So the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is about market access. What I would say, though, is that it is not about tariff liberalization. It is about ensuring and building partnerships and confidence in each other's markets through our regulators, through these conversations, and looking at assuring the quality of the access that we have granted to each other through existing rules on tariffs, but also looking at new sets of rules that frankly go beyond goods trade. Digital economy issues have not that much to do with tariffs. What's crossing borders is bits and bytes, but also what's crossing borders is a set of values and a desire to build confidence in how we connect, how we are interconnected in today's economy. So I think that this is one of the most important initiatives that we have ongoing, and also incredibly important that we are doing it with our partners in the Indo-Pacific region.
And what do you think might be our path forward in U.S.-China trade negotiations?
That is a question about which I personally and my agency spends a lot of our time thinking about and working on. What I would like to say is that the public debate recently has been very, very fixated on the issue of the tariffs, What does it mean to remove the tariffs? What does it mean for our leverage? Let me say this. There are a set of challenges that we are facing right now collectively in our global economy. We need to look at the tools that we can use to address that. And I know this committee has spoken with respect to tariff exclusions and the tariff exclusion process. I just want to be clear and put this in context. Tariff exclusion is a temporary and targeted relief from existing tariffs. It does not remove the existing tariffs. That's an important distinction that's been lost in the public debate. But also the other piece of what's been lost in the public debate is whatever we need to do for ourselves in this relationship around the world to get through the set of challenges that we are facing today. We will one day find ourselves on the other side of these challenges. And I think it is very, very important that what we do now not undermine the need that we have to make ourselves more competitive and to defend our economic interests in a global system that for the past several decades has eroded our leadership in many, many different areas in the economy.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Coons. Senator Collins.
Thank you. Good morning, Ambassador. In 2018, China imposed a 25% retaliatory tariff on U.S. lobsters, which obviously affects the state of Maine more than any other state in the nation. Before the tariff, China was the second largest importer of American lobster in the world. During the first month under the new tariffs, however, live lobster exports to China declined by 64%. Now, the 2020 Phase 1 trade deal required China to purchase more than $500 billion of U.S. exports in 2020 and 2021. I worked very closely with your predecessor to make sure that lobster was specifically included in that agreement. According to reports, however, China purchased only $289 billion worth of exports, nowhere near the $500 billion figure that was committed to. Now, what's frustrating to me is I raised this exact issue with you when you appeared before this subcommittee last April. Then, in February of this year, I sent you a letter asking you to hold China accountable for the purchase commitments it made under the Phase 1 trade agreement. You did not even respond to my February letter. So I'm going to try for the third time to get answers from you. What actions are you taking to hold China accountable to fulfill its U.S. lobster purchase commitments? And more broadly, what specific actions are you taking to respond to China's dismal purchasing record, its overall performance, under the Phase 1 trade agreement?
Senator Collins, let me begin by saying I'm very sorry if I've not responded yet to your February letter. I will go home, back to my office, and rectify that immediately and let you know that we will do better, and you have my commitment with respect to correspondence with you, your office, and with the Congress in general. On China's Phase 1 commitments, specifically with respect to lobster, which I know is very, very important to you and your constituents in the state of Maine. Let me, if you will allow me, put that in the larger context of China's purchase commitments in Phase 1, because those are the most public-facing of the commitments that they made in the Phase 1 agreement, and the ones that are most easily checked and visible to everyone who has access to public trade data. It has been very clear to us that China did not hit its targets in a number of areas, including with respect to lobsters in the Phase 1 commitments that they made to the United States government. We have spent several months, starting in October, having discussions with China around how they are going to fulfill those commitments now that we see that the numbers do not match up. I thought it was well worth having that conversation with China because I have always perceived and seen in my experience with China that China does care about its international credibility. What we have seen, however, through these conversations is that that has not been enough to motivate China to make good on these purchase commitments in particular. That is what is leading us to conclude that it is time to turn the page on the old playbook. We do need to enforce our rights with respect to China, and we do need to defend the interests of our entire economy, including our lobster people, lobstermen and lobsterwomen, our manufacturers, our workers, our ranchers, our producers. I feel very strongly that we need to take a new and more comprehensive look at enforcing those rights and defending those interests with respect to China, and that is what we are doing right now at USTR.
I look forward to getting more specificity from you in writing. Madam Chairman, I know my time has expired, so I would ask unanimous consent that additional questions that I have, one supporting the point that both you and the ranking member made on 301 tariffs exclusions, and the other on softwood lumber agreement, which is very important, be submitted for the record, and I hope I will get answers.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Senator Hagerty.
Thank you, Chair Shaheen and Ranking Member Moran, for holding this hearing. Ambassador Tai, it's good to see you today. I'd like to talk with you about the China tariffs that were put in place by the previous administration, and specifically, I'd like to talk about the negotiating leverage that those tariffs provide. I can tell you from personal experience that when those tariffs were imposed on China, that it was felt around the world. It demonstrated, particularly to Japan, the third largest economy in the world, that we were serious about leveling the playing field for American producers. It helped us open significant new markets for American agriculture, and importantly, it allowed us to establish a very high standard digital trade agreement. Ambassador Tai, I understand that China is not living up to the commitments that it's made under Phase 1. You've talked about that at length. My question for you is, wouldn't removing these tariffs simply encourage more bad behavior? What kind of message would it send to China?
Well, I appreciate that question very much, Senator Hagerty, because at USTR, we are responsible for the formulation of American trade policy and guiding the U.S. economy through challenges and opportunities that are presented today, but really to set up the American economy for success in the future. The China tariffs are, in my view, a significant piece of leverage, and a trade negotiator never walks away from leverage. The question for us, and this is something that we have done in the Biden administration with respect to a number of different Section 301 investigations and tariff actions, is how do you convert this leverage into a strategic program that will strengthen American competitiveness and defend our interests in a global economy in which China will continue to play. Mm-hmm. We need to use our tools more effectively. We need new tools. We need to bring an entirely new approach. And I think that all of those things are built on the back of the tools that we have in our hands right now.
I certainly think sustaining leverage from the standpoint of a business person, which I've been all my life, is a critical factor here. I hear the argument that it'll have an impact on inflation. Look, inflation didn't take off when the tariffs were imposed. It stayed, at or below 2% when the tariffs were originally imposed. So I think that's a false argument, and I appreciate the fact that you appreciate the leverage that you have and encourage you to use it. I'd like to turn now to the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, so-called IPAF. You've met with representatives from the 13 countries that participate in the Indo-Pacific Framework. And many experts have argued that the IPAF is too vague, it lacks substance, and perhaps that was the price of convincing more countries to join the framework. But as you focus on making IPAF more substantive, I urge you to build on the successes of our nation's prior engagements in Asia. And specifically, I'd like to talk about my experience when I was U.S. Ambassador to Japan as we negotiated the U.S.-Japan Digital Trade Agreement. It's comprehensive. It's a high-standard agreement that addresses digital barriers, and I think it holds great potential. So, Ambassador Tai, I'd like to ask you your thoughts and whether you've considered looking at the U.S.-Japan Digital Trade Agreement and perhaps using its provisions, parts thereof that have been fully negotiated, as a standalone sector-specific trade agreement in the region.
Well, Senator Hagerty, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I think that in this administration we are picking up on those relationships, and I do agree that there's a lot of energy in this region and also worldwide for trade conversations and trade work to be done with respect to the digital economy, how we can work together, how we can formulate rules, how we can establish common understanding to facilitate the growth in this part of our economy. So that is absolutely a part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework that we are working on.
Good.
I think what I would like to say with respect to the standalone sectoral approach, however, is that we're actually much more ambitious about what we can accomplish and what we should accomplish with respect to our partners in this region. And so while digital will be an integral part of what we are bringing to the negotiations and the conversation in the Indo-Pacific, it will not be the only one, because digital itself implicates so many aspects of our economy, so many of our stakeholders. It needs to be itself a comprehensive and robust approach to digital economic and trade relations,
it'll present a good
and also
example.
be part of a larger package.
Yeah, and I look forward to working with you on that. One last point. I'd like to discuss a very worrying development that's occurring in Mexico. And Mexico is one of the United States' most important international partners, and it's our closest neighbor to the south. There are many difficult issues that we're trying to deal with in Mexico, but our robust economic relationship should provide a firm foundation to strengthen and stabilize our efforts with an eye toward our future relationship there. But actions over the past year by the government of the current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, have weakened that bond and are threatening the economic ties of our two nations. Last month, 9 of my colleagues joined me to send a letter to President Biden to address the Mexican government's aggression toward U.S. companies, particularly the arbitrary and punitive actions recently taken against Vulcan Materials. Vulcan Materials is a strategic supplier, particularly to the southeast part of the United States, in terms of how we build our infrastructure. So, Ambassador Tai, we've yet to hear back from President Biden. I know you've weighed in on this topic with the Minister of Economy in Mexico. We can't tolerate our nearest neighbor to the south basically nationalizing American companies' assets. It's extremely damaging to our nation's working relationship, and I hope that you'll commit to taking an immediate action to help address these illegal actions.
Senator Hagerty, are you speaking with respect to Mexico's energy policies, specifically or across the board?
No, I'm speaking to the fact that Mexico has nationalized a piece of a mining operation that is responsible for sending aggregate into the Gulf of Mexico, and basically we're dependent on it, not only in Florida, but all the way through the southeast.
Well, thank you for that clarification. Let me assure you that one message that I hope is conveyed very, very clearly through my participation in this hearing is the commitment of the USTR to the enforcement of all of our trading rights, and I want to assure you that my team is working on all aspects of these issues. And I can assure you that we will not rest. Yeah. Enforcement is a critical piece, and we are working on the challenges that we have with Mexico.
Yeah, I appreciate your diligence there. I've heard also strongly from the energy community as well that this is also an issue.
Thank you, Senator Hagerty.
Thank you.
Senator Feinstein would be next, but this is her birthday, so we're going to give her plenty of time to settle in and get ready and go to Senator Braun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the great successes of the Trump administration, I think, was reorienting Washington's focus on national security, economic threats posed by the China Communist Party. The way I look at in the geopolitical landscape, they're playing with a chessboard, and we seem to be very reactive. Everything I see that they're doing is incrementally building up their military capabilities, but I really think they intend to win economically, day by day, month by month, year by year, to where when that day comes, when they probably will inevitably be a larger economy than ours, they've certainly become skilled state capitalists, we'll wonder, did we make the right moves along the way? I'm concerned that they have the ability, they're patient, I view them as a saving and investing country. The Road and Belt program tells you that. I think they're hedging their bets there as they increasingly do things that make them less than a handshake business partner. Won't repeat all of it, but the intellectual property issue that they seem to go after with impunity. They way overproduce. Look at our steel industry. They've got half the world's capacity, dump the gluts on the market. We've got to be careful. Ideally, in a world that works right, you have the ability to have free trade. In places where it's not fair and free, we better be careful. President Trump's 301 tariffs were successful in bringing the CCP to the table, put real pressure on the Chinese government. Moving forward, I think they help us reduce reliance on the Chinese market. And by the way, they are a trading economy. We are not, but we accommodate them mostly for our propensity to import, consume, and spend. All kind of abstract considerations that, to me, they're getting the winning end of the bargain at this point. That's why I'm concerned about the one tool to limit USTR's flexibility with restrictions on 301. That tool there, we can't do that. Do you agree that the USTR must have the flexibility to design an exclusion process that also maintains sufficient economic pressure to go along with it?
Senator Brown, I absolutely agree with that.
Well, that's great because I think the proof will be in how we practice it. Would you care to elaborate in some detail how you see our relationship with China evolve over the next half a decade to a decade, and what your main concerns are about how they're playing the game versus how we're reacting to it?
Thank you so much for this opportunity, because I think that this is absolutely the question that we need to focus on with respect to positioning the American economy today for the future and for future success. Let me begin by saying this. Unless we define the problem, there's not going to be a good way for us to assess whether or not we are solving it, whether or not we are being effective. I think that...
are you doing well at defining it now?
Well, the Section 301 investigation that was launched by the Trump administration that you referenced addressed a very legitimate and deep problem that we have had with Chinese economic practices, which is with respect to intellectual property rights and forced tech transfer practices. But that's not the sum total of the challenge that we have. And I think that in your comments, you have started getting at the contours of the challenge that we have, which is a fundamental economic incompatibility between a very, very market-based economy that we have here in the United States and very strict division between the state and the private sector, and a Chinese economy through which the Chinese state's interests and control and direction extend. To your point about, it would be great if we could have free trade, but you have to know who you're competing against. I always come back to the David Ricardo Econ 101, where you have comparative advantage, and if you've got two islands, one that both of them producing bananas and making boats, but one of them has the conditions for producing bananas, and the other one, say, has more engineers. The logic is that you should have one focus on making boats and the other one make bananas. They can trade, and everybody is better off. The problem is that that is not the world that we live in. And especially if you expand out that economic model and you say it's not just 2 products that our economies make, but let's say there are 25 products that our economies make. And then you look at the theory of comparative advantage, and then you realize the advantages are not always natural. When you're working with another economy, even in the simplistic model, where that economy is not is a state capitalist model, that economy is going to be able to target and take over entire industries and create advantages that the market-based economy doesn't have. That's the fundamental challenge that we have. And unless we start focusing on identifying that as the problem and thinking through how we address it, I think that we condemn ourselves to repeating cycles of experiences that we've had, from steel and aluminum to solar. Right now, the Chinese government, the PRC, is looking very closely at semiconductors and a number of other strategic industrial areas that are going to be critical for our future and our future competitiveness. And so from me to you, my answer is we need to be keeping our eye on the ball on this bigger picture. And with respect to all of the economic challenges and the pinches that we and Americans are experiencing right now, it is our responsibility to do what we can to provide that relief. But I will just be very, very clear with respect to tariffs and trade tools. We can impact the design of our competition, and we can impact the competitiveness of our economy in the medium and the long term with respect to short-term challenges. There is a limit to what we can do with respect to especially inflation.
I agree.
Thank you, Senator Braun.
The long run is always the bigger consideration, and it's tough to navigate correctly through the short run, but it sounds like you got a handle on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Braun. Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to welcome you here. And I wanted to talk a little bit about China and China trade. When I became mayor of San Francisco, one of the first things I did was develop what was called a sister city relationship with Shanghai. And over the years, we had some 50 different trade efforts ongoing, leading from San Francisco and other areas in California. And I think particularly when Jiang Zemin became president, that was sort of a heyday for us. So the relationship has always been a very positive and good one. You have said that the United States must enforce terms of the Phase 1 agreement, and you've outlined principles for a multilateral trade approach to China, and that discussions with China are taking place. It would be really helpful for me to hear more of the detail about what concrete steps are being taken to move this relationship forward. I say this as a Californian. We believe it's the century of the Pacific, and that these relationships are extraordinarily important.
Thank you so much, Senator Feinstein, and let me add my congratulations to Chair Shaheen's on the occasion of your birthday. Again, the U.S.-China relationship, as I've said before, because it is true, is one of profound consequence. We are the two largest economies in the world, and how we relate to each other affects...
Ambassador Tai, can we ask you to put the mic a little closer so that...
Thank you.
Absolutely. How we relate to each other affects not just workers and businesses, communities, businesses large and small in our own economies, but how we relate to each other impacts the entire world. And that is very, very clear for all of us to see. And so in terms of the realignment that we talk about in the Biden administration that we know that the United States needs to have with China in trade and economics, it means that the status quo and the way things have been cannot continue. In order to be able to compete, in order for our workers and our businesses to have an opportunity to thrive, we need to fundamentally adjust how we relate to each other, and we need to expand the set of tools that we use. We need to expand the way that we use
May
our
I
tools.
be so rude as to interrupt you? How would you do this? That's the question. And what parts of the government? Because it has seemed to me that over the years that China works very differently than the United States does. And you really start with personal relationships, and then you build them into business relationships, which is sort of contrary to how we trade. But that's what I have learned in my interaction as mayor of San Francisco and trying to build trade for California.
You are absolutely correct. Personal relationships, whether they're in the U.S. Congress or they're in international economic relations, do define possibility. I will share with you that over the course of the past almost year and a half of my time in my position, that I think that the U.S.-China relationship has really suffered from the COVID pandemic and policies that the Chinese government has taken with respect to managing COVID. There have been very, very few in-person interactions between members of our administration and the members of the Chinese government. I think that those conversations are very, very important. But what I also want to make clear is that in those conversations, we, as the United States, have to be extremely clear and extremely clear-eyed and unrelenting about our interests. We do not need to get emotional about the challenges that we have, but it is absolutely incumbent upon us to be as tough as we need to be in order to navigate a future where the United States and China are economies in this world that need to be able to compete on fair terms.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ambassador Tai, welcome. Good to see you. I'm looking forward to your visit to Alaska next week, and in that vein, wanted to broaden the discussion here. Obviously, a great deal of focus on China, where we are with the Section 301 tariffs. Our reality, though, is that China is now importing 50% more seafood now than it did in 2017. Unfortunately, China is sourcing this seafood from other nations. Our producers are not fairly able to access the growing market due to the tariffs. You understand above everyone the background on this. In 2020 and 2021, China's seafood purchases of U.S. seafood product were down 44, and 38% respectively relative to the 2017 baseline. So you're going to be north next week. You're going to be talking with folks in the resource sector, but particularly those in the seafood sector. You'll have an opportunity to go out, be on the ground, and see what it really means to these local and regional economies. So the question that I would ask for you this morning is, what are you going to share with them in terms of what efforts this administration is making to help address these tariffs that have been so harmful to U.S. seafood industry, and more specifically to the Alaska industry. And as you respond to this question, recognize that beyond China, the reduction in trade barriers to seafood markets in Japan, in the European Union, the UK, these are all also priorities for us. So can you speak to the Alaska seafood issues and the tariffs that folks have been operating under for far too long?
Well, thank you, Senator Murkowski, and I'm also looking forward to the trip to Alaska, which follows on the invitation you extended me at this hearing last year. I've never been to Alaska before. But even more, the reason why I'm looking forward to this is precisely to have the types of conversations that you've just outlined are awaiting me in your home state. Every time I travel out into the United States, especially to places I've never been before, and have these conversations, I learn something new. And I'll just share with you, in mid-April, I made a trip out to Oregon and the Oregon coast and met with some fishermen at Senator Wyden's invitation. Senator Merkley was there as well. Those conversations really helped to inform me with respect to the real world the real impact on real members of our communities in the WTO fishery subsidies negotiations that we just had last week, and how important it is to engage in establishing rules for ensuring that in fisheries that we have a sustainable approach and we have fair parameters for the world's fishermen to engage in.
Let me go ahead and interrupt, because I have one more question that I want to ask. You will get an earful. You will get an earful. You will see it for yourself. And our hope and the reason for the invitation, not only from myself but Senator Sullivan, is so that we can see action in this area. I wanted to shift just very briefly here with regards to Arctic and our friends in the Arctic, most notably Iceland. Iceland's a great friend of ours. We've got good, strong relationships through Arctic strategy and transatlantic relations. U.S. is the 5th largest import and export market for Iceland. Iceland's made tremendous gains in its renewable energy sector. We've got a great relationship. Again, China, a non-Arctic nation on the other side of the globe, has recently signed a free trade agreement with Iceland. The people in Iceland are saying, why not us? Why not us? You run risks, I think, when we discourage countries from doing business with autocracies, whether it's China and Russia, but then we don't offer them any viable alternatives. We say, we'll be there for you, but we're not going to enter into the free trade agreement. Your comments to why this has not been addressed, at least in a significant way. I know the ask has been out there for some time because I've been part of those discussions. So any update that you might have on an Iceland free trade agreement?
So unquestionably, Iceland is an important trading partner. And in fact, I met my Icelandic counterpart in Geneva last week at the WTO. I think that all of the reasons that you have raised in terms of enhancing our collaboration with Iceland economically are entirely valid. And Iceland is an EFTA country, so with respect to our build and rebuild of our relationship with the EU, that those do have positive implications for our relationship with Iceland as well. I am ready and willing to show up and to engage with all of our partners. Take your point on the strategic aspects. I guess what I would say with respect to what you've just presented to me is that the fact that Iceland has just signed a free trade agreement with China will make us thoughtful about how we, the parameters of the kinds of collaborations that we build with Iceland to ensure that, and I think that this is very true in terms of our approach to the Indo-Pacific as well, to ensure that what we are doing is providing our partners with choice, with more choices, is providing us with more choices as well, but is not entangling us further into a version of globalized supply chains that is going to undermine our ability to build for more resilience. And I think that with respect to China and the Chinese market, this goes back to your fishermen as well, we have seen China use its leverage with respect to its market to push countries on political and sovereign decisions that China has found that it doesn't like. We are a very, very large economy, and we experience it differently. But this is the version of that coercion that we experience. It's not coercive, but it is very painful. I think that this is absolutely something that we are focused on addressing in the U.S.-China relationship, which is the reliability and confidence that we have in each other. And to the extent that we don't have it, all of the collaborations that we need to have with our other partners and allies to ensure that we provide each other with resilience.
I appreciate that. I know that it would mean a great deal to Iceland, and it doesn't take much from us. So I look forward to exploring these conversations further. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I know you'll enjoy Alaska, because I've been to Alaska with Senator Murkowski, and it was terrific. I just want to warn you, though, the way they measure things in Alaska, it's how many times bigger it is than Rhode Island. So just be prepared for that, okay? Yeah. I just came from the Banking Committee hearing with Chairman Powell of the Federal Reserve. We are facing an issue of inflation, which is significant, with multiple causes. But one that everyone admits to is the supply chain. And I know we have a task force in place. Can you tell us what progress we're making on rearranging our supply chain? And just one other comment is that we built and took for granted a global supply chain built on efficiency and speed without sustainability or the ability to reconnect quickly. With the pandemic, that's been broken, and I don't know if it'll be put together again, but what are you doing in the task force on supply chain?
Senator Reid, thank you for this question. I wish that I also were able to visit Chairman Powell's hearing, because I know how much inflation is impacting our economy and our people and how concerning it really is. And I agree with you. I think that with respect to supply chains, the bottlenecks, the disruptions that we've had these last couple of years, that they have been a significant disruptor in our economies and significantly eroded our confidence, and I mean collectively our American and worldwide confidence in the global economic system, which is why working towards a version of globalization that is built for beyond efficiency, resilience, and sustainability is our guiding principle in terms of our engagements with all of our partners and our initiatives that are ongoing right now. Let me say this on supply chains in particular. I had a really eye-opening conversation with a CEO and chairman earlier at the early parts of this year, who is in the banking industry, and we were talking supply chains. And he said to me, you know, as I've been looking at the supply chain challenges, what strikes me is that I would never have designed these supply chains to look like this. And at the time, I didn't quite understand what he meant by that, and I thought about it through the lens of a banker. And what has struck me is what I think is an important perspective, which is our supply chains have not taken into account risk. They have been all about efficiency. And in terms of what we can contribute from trade to building supply chains that are more resilient, I think a key part of this is incorporating into our work on trade beyond tariff liberalization is how we can incentivize countries and more specifically our firms to calculate in the risk of their supply chain design as they make their business decisions. And this is one of the key issue areas that we are raising with our trading partners and all the initiatives we have going on right now.
I think that is a sensible approach. Can you give us any sense of tangible progress in this regard of rationalizing the supply chains, as you say, make it more robust and resilient?
USTR was tasked with heading the supply chain task force on an interagency basis. We have a list of all of the work that we have done over the course of the last year, which I won't go into, and I will refer you to our website and let you know that it is there. But I think that the most important work is yet to come. And has really got to be on an international basis. How do we connect our economies together, and how do we, in a very, very clear-eyed way, identify the things that we have to do to correct for a set of supply chains and a version of globalization that's built only for efficiency right now. And so just let you know that whether it's in the Indo-Pacific, whether it's our initiative with Taiwan, the initiative that on the future of Atlantic trade that we have going on with the United Kingdom, the EU Trade and Technology Council, and all of these different arrangements, we are laser focused on this issue of our supply chain resilience.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's great to see you, Ambassador Tai. I want to turn to the recently announced U.S. Taiwan Initiative on 21st century trade. If you could just quickly identify the top priorities that you expect to come out of that agreement and tangible changes in terms of trade with Taiwan that you hope to see.
Certainly. Thank you, Senator Van Hollen, and I appreciate your interest in this particular relationship and this issue. In our announcement kicking off this particular initiative, we identified 11 areas where our initiative will be focused. 7 of those areas are the same or similar to the ones that we've announced in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Those go to digital economy and digital trade, labor, environment, trade facilitation, science-based and evidence-based regulatory practices when it comes to trade for agricultural products. In the category of the additional areas where we will be focused with Taiwan in our initiative, I think that there are a very, very interesting set of conversations around non-market economy challenges that we share, state-owned enterprises, and the other 2, I'm going to have to look at my notes, but they're also on our website. But I think that they're particularly relevant and consistent with what I just said to Senator Reid. They're looking at how we can work together with our partners on building resilience, sustainability, and then the other piece that's really, really critical to us is inclusiveness. As we build out into an economic recovery, how do we bring as many in the world, in our own communities as we can, into prosperity?
Well, thank you, Madam Ambassador. As you know, there was some concern, including shared by many in the Senate, that Taiwan was not part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. But I'm glad that you've developed this initiative and look forward to working with you on both those fronts. So on another committee, Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I chair the subcommittee on Africa, and interested in what you at USTR are doing with respect to U.S. trade and investment in Africa, which in my view is good for U.S. businesses, good for U.S. workers, good for partners in the region. And I think it's worth noting that in the next 30 years, the population of the entire continent is expected to double, and 1/4 of the world will live in Africa by the year 2050. So it seems to me that we need to really keep our eye on the ball here and do better than we have. Obviously, some of our chief adversaries and competitors like China have very much engaged in Africa. What are you doing at USTR, and are you working with the Prosper Africa Initiative folks to make sure that we combine our resources in a smart way?
Absolutely. USTR is a active participant in the Prosper Africa efforts within the administration, and I agree with everything you've said, Senator Van Hollen, about the opportunities and, frankly, the necessity of the United States to amp up our engagement with Africa for all the reasons you've listed, and also I think one of the most interesting and awesome, frankly, data points is also the number of young people that are in Africa, and that goes to the growing population, that the youth of the world are largely in Africa, and this is really about our collective future. Let me say this with respect to U.S.-Africa trade. AGOA is a foundational trade program that we have had with the African continent. It expires in 2025, and there have been a lot of conversations with my African counterparts around what's going to happen to AGOA after 2025. I know that there are a lot of leaders, thought leaders on this issue within the U.S. Congress, and I will let you know that USTR is engaging and stands ready to engage across the board on what a vision is for AGOA going forward. But I'll also let you know it is my view that AGOA is not enough. AGOA has been around for a long time, and I think AGOA can do better. But also, I'll just share with you in the context of the World Trade Organization 12th Ministerial Conference that just concluded last week, that with respect to the intellectual property rule changes that were made for COVID vaccines for a limited period of time to address the COVID pandemic, that I found most powerful, my African counterparts who asked the United States to lean in and get that effort across the finish line, because it is going to, in their view, allow the African continent a foothold into a very important supply chain that they do not have access to. And I think that it is through new efforts, new initiatives also that we've got to push ourselves to think about how we can be a better partner to the entire African continent.
Well, thank you, Madam Ambassador. I look forward to continuing the conversation about AGOA and updating it, upgrading it. As I'm sure you know, about 90% of our non-energy imports under AGOA in 2020 came from just 5 countries. And, clearly we've got to expand the benefits of AGOA, along with engaging with Africa on the African Continental Free Trade Area and see what kind of mutual benefits we can draw. So I look forward to continuing that conversation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Ambassador Tai, I think I think Senator Moran also have a couple more questions, so we would like to do another round with you. And I would like to go back to Russia. And I think that the actions that you and the President engaged in leading up to Russia's war in Ukraine have been very important in helping to unite the allies and present a united front, and being able to put in place a series of sanctions that, while they are taking some time, they are having a real impact. In April, Congress passed a bill revoking Russia's permanent normal trade relations status. This law gives you additional authority to sanction Russia in other ways. I wonder if you can give us some insights into what you're thinking and how you might be using this authority.
Well, Chair Shaheen, I want to begin by thanking you and the entire U.S. Congress for speaking with such conviction and resolution on the issue of Russia. Earlier this year, the United States government being able to respond with one voice was incredibly powerful and enabled us to take a real leadership role in responding to Russia's aggression in Ukraine. As a result of the bill that Congress passed and that the President signed into law earlier this spring, the United States has, with respect to trade, suspended permanent normal trade relations with Russia. And that means that we've imposed non-MFN tariffs on imports from Russia. And that action alone has increased tariff rates on over 75% of U.S. imports from Russia. We are continuing to engage in the administration through our conversations, also with other partners and allies, to look at how we can use this new authority to impose additional consequences on imports from Russia. I think what I would really also like to note here is that we've talked a lot about tariffs in the course of this particular hearing. And I just want to note that I think about tariffs a bit like tariffs are like 2x4s. They can be used for lots of different purposes. With respect to Russia, these tariffs are punishment. We are using these 2x4s as a kind of a weapon. But in other areas, right, our tariffs are used to build platforms. They are used as weapons to level the playing field. They are used as encouragement to create enforcement and incentivize compliance. So in this particular area, I also feel that it is important from the USTR perspective to note that these tariffs we are using in a particular way, which is appropriate and which is focused on changing Russia's behaviors.
Well, thank you. I certainly agree with that and agree with your sentiment that it's been very important for Congress to be united in responding to Russia's unprovoked war. And it sent an important signal, not just to Russia, but to our other adversaries who are really looking closely at what we're doing here and how we're responding. Just to follow up, so then I would urge you to think about every way possible, as you say, that we can penalize Russia for what they're doing. And if you see ways in which this subcommittee can be helpful with that, or that Congress can do more, I hope you'll share that with us. You mentioned in your opening remarks the importance of the legislation that's currently in the Committee of Conference, whether it's America Competes or the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. So much of the discussion at this hearing has been about China and the threat that China poses. Can you talk about, I mean, one of the motivating, the main motivator behind that legislation, I think, is to try and level the playing field for the United States with China. Can you talk about what it will mean if we are not able to bring that legislation across the finish line, and what kind of a disadvantage that will put the United States at against China?
I'd be delighted to, Chair Shaheen. With respect to realigning our relationship with China, there is a set of, there's both defense and offense that we have to play. And frankly, when I look at tariffs, I see the tariffs mostly as defense. But if our goal with respect to China and frankly every other non-market economy that our businesses and our workers have to compete with, defense isn't enough. We've also got to play offense. And I think that in terms of what is in the conversation around the Bipartisan Innovation Act, it goes by many names. It is a combination of defensive tools and offensive tools. And what I mean by offensive tools are those are the tools to really invest in ourselves, to give our industry and our workers the boost to take their talents and resources and assets and allow them to shine in a competitive field that we have not considered fair in a very long time, and which is really critical to our success in the future. So the way I look at what is before our members of Congress right now in this conference is really things that we need to do that are necessary, but by themselves not sufficient for putting the American economy on the strongest footing possible. And I think that there is a lot more work for us to be doing together, the administration and Congress, and I am committed to doing that work with all of you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and hope that all of the conferees will hear that statement today. Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for being here and doing the job that you do, and we're very hopeful in your accomplishments. Let me just ask a question here. I got two of them. The state-backed companies that are circumventing U.S. trade laws by a variety of methods, including transshipment and dumping. Transshipment of goods through third countries to evade anti-dumping duties undermines the integrity of our trade laws and puts domestic manufacturers at risk from unfairly traded products. In a nutshell, what happens, and I can just tell you a little company in West Virginia that makes a lot of products for the solar industry, and they're now competing with dumping parts, and they know it's coming from China, but it's coming through different vessels, if you will. So I applaud yours and Secretary Mondo's inclusion of annual audits of steel producers owned by, operated by Chinese parent companies in the recently struck trade agreement with the UK, and I encourage you to continually pursue that audits in any future trade agreements. So given its inclusion in the recent UK trade agreement, how likely is it that you all will pursue similar audit provisions, whether it be for steel or other products, in future trade deals?
Well, Senator Manchin, I'm always delighted to talk about U.S. manufacturing and how we can make the American economy create more opportunities and be a rosier place for our manufacturers.
We're just asking for a level playing field.
A level playing field, absolutely. Your specific question goes to our interest in incorporating audit provisions in our arrangements with our trading partners to ensure that the playing field remains level. I'm very interested in this issue of audits, and I'm interested in expanding it beyond anti-dumping and
when you have a U.S. company that identifies that they know they're getting dumped on, and all they're asking for is an audit from the country, just pick an Indonesian country anywhere, pick one, and we know this being funneled through China, to have that audit show that they don't have the production facilities, they can't do it there, so they have to be funneling from somewhere else. I think that we could determine that pretty easily, and then classify them as for anti-dumping.
I think that audits and verification go to the heart of the integrity of our trade tools, and I agree with you entirely.
Okay. The other one is the relationship between U.S. and China. I know we've been talking a lot about that. It's been tumultuous over the years. I think basically we appear to have had progress by 2019 having a trade deal with them. But then with COVID coming up and China failed on a number of their purchase agreements, and while it's important to note that the initial phase occurred during the pandemic, they have made no efforts to reassure the United States they're committed to making good on the terms that they agreed to. So given a 2020 Phase 1 trade agreement between us and China ultimately did not produce its desired outcomes, what avenues are being explored right now to ensure that fairness in any future trade agreements between China and ourselves?
This is absolutely one of the most important questions that we are grappling with right now, and one of the most important issues to determine what our economic future looks like in this globalized economy. Senator Manchin, I've talked quite a bit about China. Last October, I gave a speech about the Biden administration's approach to the U.S.-China trade relationship. We spent several months focused on China's performance under the Phase 1 agreement, and as we turned the corner into 2022 and we were able to look at full-year trade data for 2020 and 2021, we absolutely saw gaps between the purchase commitment levels in particular that China committed to and also where the purchases actually were. Let me just say this also. In the speech that I gave in October, we also reviewed our approach to the China trade and economic relationship over the course of the past several administrations. And it is very, very clear, certainly to me at this point, that it is time for us to turn the page on the playbook that we have had with China, which has been a combination of negotiating agreements.
Do you have
on one
enforcement
hand,
mechanisms, any enforcement mechanisms available to you all to be used?
we absolutely, we do.
Are you all going to use them?
Yes.
Okay. And let me ask you on the first question too, both of them. Is there something that we need to do to help you basically, tighten down on some of this? Because they're just running amok, playing us, displaying us really. And it's a shame. We keep talking about, and I'll tell you my biggest peeve right now is the whole thing with the EVs, the batteries, chips, and all the different things, rare earth minerals processing, anodes, cathodes, everything that we need. And if we're ever going to get this industry up and running and be self-sufficient in North America, then we have to make sure that they can't dump on us. And right now, we're about ready to put our whole eggs in one basket thinking EV is the way to go, and we're going to be absolutely so taken advantage of to the point to where we're going to be held hostage by the foreign supply chain that China has a grip on. I just can't believe that we're even thinking about going down that path. And I'm going to do everything I can to stop it because I think it's stupid. Because we are not able to protect our investments in the country because if Jerry Moran in Kansas wants to start a new company and he's up and running and they start dumping, he can't compete. He can't go out and get financing. He has no, the markets aren't going to basically respond to him. And we're just held at a disadvantage because of the economy that we have and the way we administer our economy. But we depend on you all to crack hard and crack them down as tight as you can. We talk about border adjustment. I don't know if you've talked about that, Madam Chairman, if you all have talked about border adjustments. The reason that we have Democrats and Republicans talking about border adjustment, we think that's the only level playing field we might have. They're not paying attention to any of the agreements they sign, and we have no penalties to them. But a border adjustment, we would have that product coming in, and we prove it came from a country, but it really came from China via other countries. So that's my frustration. I'm sorry to that. I thank you for giving me a chance to do that.
Thank you, Senator Manchin. Ambassador Tai, would you like to briefly respond to Senator Manchin?
Senator Manchin, you began that by asking what you can do and to help, and I think that what you've just conveyed is absolutely, I want to let you know, loud and clear and well received by me sitting in this chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. In this setting and with the Secretary of Commerce, both the chairman and I and other members of the committee have had ongoing conversations about lumber, particularly as they relate to home building, home prices. We are still absent this agreement with Canada. Can you provide me an update on any progress that's been made in a long-term resolution of this issue with Canada on soft wood lumber?
Yes, Senator Moran, I'd be happy to provide you with an update. I talk lumber almost every single time I've seen my Canadian counterpart, and I've seen her quite a bit in these last several months. I've indicated that we are open and interested in addressing lumber through another agreement which we had in place several years ago. That requires the Canadian government to be willing to address the fundamental challenges that we have with respect to an unlevel playing field for our industry with respect to how they govern their harvesting and their industry, which has the impact of subsidies for our competitors. When and if Canadian industry and the Canadian government are ready to address those issues, we stand ready and willing to enter into negotiations to see if we can once again come to some kind of an agreement with Canada.
Leverage has been a theme of the conversations this morning. Is there leverage with Canada in that regard to induce them to do so?
Senator Moran, I like the way you think, and I'd be happy to have a follow-up conversation with you around how we might examine that question.
All right, thank you. One of the more recent developments in home building and in home ownership has developed as a result of the lack of grain-oriented electric steel needed to build transformers. And so there is a shortage in Kansas, and I assume the country, in getting the transformer necessary to build a new home or to have a new home have a connection with utilities. I know that we increased tariffs on imported steel. I know there was a Department of Commerce investigation that subsequently found no corresponding increase in domestic manufacturing to meet U.S. demand. This type of steel remains under Section 232 tariffs. Any thoughts of what USTR can do to solve this problem of lack of transformers?
Senator Moran, let me go back to USTR and check the facts, because I've had two sets of conversations on grain-oriented electric steel of late. One is around the need to access more of them or more of this type of steel for transformers. The other one goes to some of your colleagues here in the Senate and also in the House who represent states and districts where there is one lone producer in the United States left. In my mind, the fact is that GOES is not subject to 232, but let me come back to you with better facts. Let me just say these conversations really break my heart, because they're similar to the conversations we have on solar. We litigated several cases at the WTO against China on their approach to cornering the market on grain-oriented electric steel and our loss of our own industry. And what I find time and time again is, whether it is with respect to GOES or solar, that once we have lost the better part of our industry, we find ourselves totally over a barrel domestically and also with our other trading partners around how we can have reliable access to these types of industrial products where we have confidence in their integrity. And so let me just say this, bottom line is, let me go back to USTR and do some homework and follow up with you.
Finally, again, on this conversation of tariffs being utilized as leverage, it seems to me that if we're creating a circumstance in which we want and have leverage, the result would be that we would be negotiating additional trade agreements, bilateral, multilateral, but the administration has not requested trade promotion authority. That's one thing. What new agreements, trade agreements, is the administration pursuing that then justifies the use of tariffs to be leverage?
I think that in terms of the China tariffs, that's with respect to leverage vis-a-vis China. Mm-hmm. And it's been a very long time since we've looked at negotiating what I would call a traditional trade liberalizing agreement with China. I think the last effort that we had was the bilateral investment treaty, and that was way back in 2015 and 2016, and I don't think, this may be when they come out of the woodwork, I don't think anyone has asked me to re-engage with that particular issue. At USTR, I had an agency that is built for two things, and it's on a spectrum. These two activities are not mutually exclusive. One is trade negotiations, and the other one is trade enforcement. And so we have every interest, and we are actively pursuing negotiations every single day and enforcing every single day. Your question about TPA, I am happy to engage in the conversation with Congress, and this is the larger issue around how we orient U.S. trade policies in negotiations separate from the enforcement side to further our national interests. And I think that our focus right now really is on sustainability and resilience. That means a modification and a course correction for the approach that we've taken in the past, in particular around trade liberalization. But I think it is an important conversation to have, and I would like to let you know that I am happy to engage in it with the Congress. My main point being, however, that we have got to bring new thinking to how we think about trade agreements and trade agreement negotiations. We have to take into effect the really painful experiences that we've had these couple of years and figure out how we do things differently to remain connected with the rest of the world in a way that is good for the American economy and that is built for resilience in the long term.
I appreciate your answer. I'm not going to ask you more questions, Chairman. I appreciate your answer, and I would highlight, at least from my take, I like that you put on par with negotiations of agreements, enforcement of agreements. It seems to me for a long time we celebrate, we do the high five when the agreement is signed, but when the results don't occur, there seems to be less than adequate follow-through. So I appreciate that. I also think that you are segmenting China and leverage in a different way than other trading or potential trading partners around the globe. And I think that is a positive, it's a necessary attitude to have with China. And finally, I would say that the WTO is broken. It's a pellet body. It seems to me no longer really functions. Membership so broad that agreements appear impossible, and I would just encourage trying to fix those problems, but as equally important, trying to find friendly countries around the world to institute smaller successes than appears to me we would get in work with WTO. That makes sense? Did I say anything that doesn't make sense? There is a question.
No further questions, Senator Moran.
Well, I don't know that I want the answer, but...
Well, thank you, Senator Moran. Actually, you've made a very good argument for why we need to fund USTR's budget, right? Ambassador Tai. If there are no further questions this morning, senators have until June 29th to submit additional questions for the official hearing record, and we would request the agency's responses within 30 days. So thank you very much, Ambassador Tai. This hearing subcommittee stands in recess until the call of the chair.
I didn't go so long.